next on page 370 and 371 is where we're going to start. There's 3 or 4 terms here I want to go over, and then we'll go over the rest of the chapter up here on the board. The first thing on 370 is called a complete tetanus. Now, a complete tetanus is a smooth, sustained contraction. Tetanus is not to be confused with the illness tetanus that you might get by stepping on a nail. We commonly call it lockjaw. It is not to be confused with that, but this is a smooth, sustained contraction. And in fact, they call it a disease, but it's more of an infection than it is anything else. And that's a painful state of contraction is what you'll end up with the disease or the infection of tetanus. So it is normal to have a smooth, sustained contraction if you're picking up something. And that is complete tetanus. Trepi. Trepi is the staircase warm-up effect. Yesterday was a big day for pro football. With tons and tons of teams out there playing yesterday. You think they, as soon as they got to the stadium, they put on the uniform, went on out and commenced playing? They got there hours before. They went through stretching. They went through just program after program that they do to stretch muscles, to warm up the arms, to warm up the legs, to warm up whatever. Some of them warm up their brain, if you will. But that's Trepi as a staircase warm-up effect. And anytime you go cold turkey and want to use your muscles, you're asking to tear that muscle up because it's not warmed up, ready to go. And that's Trepi, the staircase or warm-up effect. Then we get into 2 types of muscle contractions. We have an isotonic contraction, which literally means same strength, and isometric contraction, which means same length. And they do some explanation there of the isometric contraction. And in essence, if I were to sit here and hold this paper on my arm bent, it'd probably be the same length here to hold that, and I could hold that for a long time, right? But if y'all come up here and start stacking your books on top of that, I'd reach a point that the isometric contraction would turn into an isotonic contraction to try to maintain the extra weight that's being put on. So isometric, same length. Isotonic, same strength. Isometrics have a tendency of converting into isotonics if more weight is placed upon it. Boy, y'all are exciting class this morning. Well, I guess we're ready to move on. No comments, no.
But this is very exciting, very interesting.
I could tell. You know, the wheels were turning. Look at clinical application on 385. They talk a little bit here in this clinical application about paralysis. And they have a flaccid paralysis and a spastic paralysis. It says damage to spinal nerves or cell bodies of lower motor neurons, such as by things such as poliovirus, it uses for example, produces flaccid paralysis, characterized by reduced muscle tone, depressed stretch, reflexes, and atrophy. Damage to upper motor neurons or descending motor tracts at first produces spinal shock, to which there is flaccid paralysis. And this is followed in a few weeks by spastic paralysis, characterized by increased muscle tone, exaggerated stretch reflexes, and other signs of hyperactive lower motor neurons. So there's some, you've probably heard of flaccid and spastic paralysis. There are some cases that even certain levels of ions in the body can cause that one way or the other. Potassium is one of those. I want to make sure we went over something at the beginning of this. There was another one of these charts at the beginning. If I can find it. We did talk about the three things as adults we can absorb through the stomach, didn't we?
Mhm.
Okay, we got it covered then. Okay, looking up on the board now, we have, let me turn these lights out. This is the rest of the notes for this chapter. And the first part at the top basically says that the two major proteins involved in contraction is actin and myosin. Actin is a very thin filament, myosin's a thick filament. These two together make the muscles work. These, as the muscle is made here, we have the two thin and thick filaments, actin and myosin. Then you have myofibrils, specialized intracellular structure, which make up the muscle fiber or the muscle cell. And then there's several of those make up the whole muscle. So each one of your skeletal muscles, when you pick something up, not every fiber in that muscle works at the same time, unless that is an extremely heavy object. And every one of them may contract, and the heavier the object, the slower they respond. And if it's too heavy, it may not contract at all. It may overcome the strength ability of the muscle, which is part of the isometric while ago, same length. If you're picking up something small, you'll use just enough fibers to pick that up. And they'll get tired because skeletal muscle reacts quickly but doesn't last very long. So when they get tired, they'll recruit 3 other fibers to take their place. And when they get tired, they'll recruit 3 other fibers to take their place. And it just round the robin. But something small, by the time you get back to the original fibers, they're rested up, ready to go again. I mean, we've all picked up something really heavy and carried it as far as we could, set it down, rested. We didn't have to rest very long, did we? It rejuvenated, boom, we picked it up, we go again. And that's just how skeletal muscle works. Now the sarcomere is the functional unit of skeletal muscle. The functional unit definition of any organ is the smallest component that can perform all the functions of that organ. The smallest component that can perform all the functions of that organ. So the sarcomere is the smallest component of a skeletal muscle that can perform the functions of that skeletal muscle. There is an actin binding site, and there's a myosin ATPase site. Those two are important when we start making this muscle contract. And of course, energy is necessary in the form of ATP. That's our usable energy. At the bottom of this, there's 2 other proteins called regulatory. Actin and myosin are contractile proteins. These at the bottom are regulatory proteins, troponin and tropomyosin. Troponin binds to myosin and tropomyosin binds to actin. So here's how a contraction works. Calcium's necessary. We already said when the dogs lack the calcium due to removal of parathyroid glands that the dogs died because of muscle asphyxiation. So our muscle, lacking muscle contraction. So calcium attaches to troponin. And you know, we've triggered this, but we're going to pick something up, or a reflex, if you will. So calcium rushes down and attaches to troponin and changes the shape of tropomyosin, which tropomyosin's in a blocking position because its muscles relaxed, which releases from actin and allows actin and myosin to come together, shorten, and cause a contraction. This is actually called the sliding filament theory. The sliding filament theory. And there's a few pictures in the text on the sliding filament theory, but you know, basically, if you have actin and myosin cross-bridged, and they are cross-bridged all the time, the more you use a muscle, the more they stay cross-bridged. The more you lift weights, does that muscle not stay toned more? So the more you use a muscle, the more they're cross-bridged. But troponin and tropomyosin have a blocking position in between these two, so they don't come in contact or move until those are removed. And then you contract the muscle and it shortens even more. When it relaxes back out. But they're always cross-bridged. If a muscle's not ever used and does not function at all anymore, it may not be cross-bridged. But the less you use a muscle, the less it'll be cross-bridged. And that's why the more you use biceps, the more they look toned up, because they stay more cross-bridged. Their contraction is stronger now. They don't have to do as much work to get the job done because they're moving from here to here. Where before they was moving from here to here. You wonder why moving from here to here causes more pain the next day than a muscle that's used every day moving this amount? More friction, isn't there? Oh, here a while back I thought I was doing good. I did something that I knew I was going to pay for it the next day. Oh, I thought, I'm not even going to get out of bed the next day. It's going to hurt so bad. Next day I popped out of bed, felt good. I said, man, I must be in better shape than I thought. Well, I found out with older age, it hits you on day 3. I couldn't get out of bed the 3rd day. Second day, good. 3rd day, everything's delayed. See what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Everything's just a little delayed, a little slower. But that's how muscles contract. Now, it goes on to tell you that magnesium is necessary to bind the myosin to break down ATP. So we need magnesium to make ATP available. Without the energy, we're not going to slide anywhere in this sliding filament theory. The sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is the same thing as the endoplasmic reticulum. But in skeletal muscle, they rename it. Endoplasmic reticulum had rough and smooth, remember? Rough had ribosome, cytoprotein synthesis. Smooth with detox center, found a lot of it in the liver. Well, here, the sarcoplasmic reticulum has lateral sacs that contain or store calcium out in the muscle. So it's not having to travel a long ways to get the job done. We may need a reflex, which is much faster, and we can't do it unless calcium's right there readily available. So it is readily available in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and it's typically not even used totally up. When we're finished with it, we'll send it back and store some more of it. So we keep quite a bit in the muscle. Now in the relaxation process, all we have to do is simply remove calcium, put it back. When we remove the calcium block, then troponin and tropomyosin move back to the blocking positions and relaxation of the muscle occurs. So everybody goes back to where they're supposed to when calcium's taken out of the picture. So your biggest thing, of course, we have to have some kind of stimulus, which causes release of calcium, and it's a chain reaction after that. So calcium is extremely important. Now, from the information we have here, and the knowledge I know you all possess, explain rigor mortis. Now, y'all should know about this because I see a lot of rigor mortis at 9 o'clock on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays.
Is that like tight muscles in the close?
Yeah, I'd say they're stiff, since that's what they call them, stiffs.
Dead.
Dead, yes.
When people die.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Okay.
So we know what rigor mortis is. All right, we got one head nod back there. We've got one person that knows what rigor mortis is. All right, thank you, Zeke. He's either doing a lot of daubing or he's awake moving back there. Rigor mortis obviously is the stiffening of muscles after the death of an individual, whether it be a person, animal, whatever. We have to explain from the knowledge we have here why that is. Why do their muscles stiffen up after a certain amount of time after death? And then even more time later, they lose the stiffness. How do you explain that? We go from one to the other and they're dead. You're mentally dead this morning, aren't you? I can tell. At least you're grinning and breathing. That's important. Anybody want to explain this or attempt to explain? It's all right if you're wrong today.
Is it the calcium
Has a lot to do with the calcium.
in the muscles?
Has a lot to do with the energy. And muscles play a serious role in this.
What about oxygen? Like the lack of oxygen?
Probably.
Probably.
Yeah, we can always throw a probably in there.
I hate that answer.
All right. right, would you agree that the muscles have stored ATP in them? That the individual cells of the muscles have stored ATP? Okay, so let's just say this, let's just use an animal of some kind, dies, and that is a stimulus to an extent, okay? And at the same time, the body temperature is starting to cool. Now, obviously, if it's a hot day, rigor mortis is delayed. Would you agree? If it's a cold day, rigor mortis is sped up pretty good. So what happens, let's just say it's a pretty cool day and the body cools off pretty fast. As it gets to a certain point, the cells themselves may actually still be alive, although this entire body is considered dead. They have energy stored in them. And they're saying body temperature is too low. So what does muscles do when body temperature gets too low? They contract, they create friction, they maintain a temperature. Well, they use up all the energy to contract. They don't have any energy for the calcium ATPase pump to get the calcium back out to relax. And of course, they probably didn't get their job done because they run out of energy. So now we have stiffening of the muscles. Stiffening of the muscles, trying to maintain body heat, which we lost because the internal actions are not working because this animal's dead. Now over time, the muscles relax again. What does that? We didn't remove calcium. We don't have the energy to remove calcium. Well, this thought processing is a rough thing. Well, y'all wouldn't do well on a test question if I put on there and had you think through a process. I give you a scenario of knowledge and make you think through a process to answer this question. We're going to be in trouble.
Oh, you already do that.
Well, I'm trying. I want you to take some tentative, speculated guesses, all based off of knowledge that we're learning in here.
Would it have to do with the troponin?
Ultimate essence, it does, but we're not removing anything. We have no energy. Calcium's not removed, but what we have over time is tissue deterioration, which breaks the calcium down. And when that happens and the muscle relaxes because it cannot maintain the stiffness that it had in the rigor mortis process. Now, with your background, with old grandpa, no, his uncle, wasn't it? Uncle was working in mortuaries his whole life, embalming people.
My great uncle.
Great uncle. See, you should have had some of this knowledge in your background.
Oh yeah, I don't like dead people.
Who does?
No, you understand. I grew up going to a funeral constantly.
That's why you should know this. I'm gonna hold you accountable.
Stay far away from dead people.
Any questions over this?
You work in a hospital?
Yeah. She doesn't like dead people. She's working in a hospital. It's a good chance she's gonna run across a couple.
I don't deal with.
May cause a couple, well, her attitude. How we fix him? I don't know. It's too late now. Oh,
I don't fix people. That's the nurse's job, the doctor's job, technically.
do we have any understanding more of what we had before we come in here? That's a big question. Yes? Small yes. All right. Well, that summarized chapter 12. Instead of getting in serious depth, we hit the high points of chapter 12. And now we're preparing for the test on Wednesday. I thought about putting this test off to Friday,
Please? Yes?
but now I don't really see the advantage of it.
I
see
do.
the advantage.
I see the exact advantage of putting off the test until Friday.
It'd be really nice.
I mean, some of us work. We're really hard workers.
Listen, I'm not gonna buy the working thing, that's by choice. Your daddy would support you whether you worked or not.
Say that to my mama.
How many has anatomy test Wednesday? Oh, just 3 of you? Curly looks
Don't
like
put it
she's
on.
sweating it back there. Anatomy, that stuff's easy, all you gotta do is memorize it.
Well, I miss that daily too, so.
Well, just tell her all it is memorization, and see what she says.
She'll get so mad.
So, you know, Mr. Wan said that this stuff was just memorization. Get her fired up. Let's go with study guide anyway and see where we end up. That'll give me time to ponder on it. We can't just stall, we'll have to continue with other lectures and we'll move on in 7, 8, and 9 if we put it off to
We
Friday.
can do half the review today.
No.
And the
That's stalling. Number 1 on the study guide. Requirements of osmosis, diffusion, and active transport. Well, in other words, what are the situations? Osmosis is movement of water, right? And it's water only, from higher to lower. Simple diffusion, really no requirements. It's movement of a substance from higher to lower. And active transport requires energy, correct? It can go in any direction, but requires energy. It may require a carrier, but facilitated transport definitely will require a carrier. It's not listed on there. I seldom ask it. How many of y'all's been working on study guide? Oh, I'm impressed even more. I've got more of you involved now. Didn't get much sleep last night, Jennifer, working on study guide, right? Because of your dedication?
Yeah.
Okay. Phasic receptors adapt quickly, very good, to maintain stimuli. What activates gustacin proteins?
Taste.
A little more specific, you're close, but which 2 of the primary 5 taste buds is really responsible for gustacin proteins? Used to be just 4, but now the Japanese put in umami.
I don't know if what I have is right.
What do you have?
L-glutamate and L-carnitine. I can't read my handwriting.
Well, never mind. Not right.
Not the most salty.
Things that I didn't know.
Which one? You have salty and sweet?
No, I'm just asking if that's.
Yeah, that's
sweet
what
as
we're
that
looking
would-
for. It's
okay.
sweet and bitter.
Sweet.
Sweet and bitter. Sweet and bitter activates gustacin proteins.
I was gonna say food.
Which one? That's a good one. Which one of those is on the tip of the tongue? Sweet's on the tip, isn't it?
Sweet and
Sour and salty's on the sides?
And the book it said that they don't think.
Bitters in the
it's not
back?
supposed to be zoned anymore.
Well, they overlap. You can't keep them from overlapping. They're all overlapping somewhere. But I always found it unique that bitter's in the back, and most substances that are poisonous have a bitter tint to them. So by the time, that's a little bitter, well, it's too late. It's already down the hatch. So, number 4, stapedius muscle. What do you have?
Provides protection to
Well, we hope.
the
It
helps the
We're-
nerves from being damaged.
It reduces the amplification of the ossicles to prevent nerve damage, long-term nerve damage. Number 5, process of focusing. That is simply the term accommodation or contraction of ciliary muscles, like we talked about in the class the other day, where if the ciliary muscle is contracted, then it loosens the suspensory ligaments. It rounds the lens to focus on near vision.
True.
Far vision, that is true. Far vision, the ciliary muscles relax, the suspensory ligaments are tight, flattens the lens, far vision's focused upon. Number 6, what secretes hormones and how are they secreted? Well, endocrine glands are going to secrete the hormones, and they are secreted in book says two different ways, pulsatile fashion or discrete burst. In other words, a little bit at a time, waits for feedback. A little bit at a time, waits for feedback. Where is oxytocin? Let me rephrase. Where is oxytocin produced? Where is it made?
Posterior
Hypothalamus makes it. Where is it released from and thus probably stored at? Posterior pituitary, which is known as the neurohypophysis. Now we remember that now? Okay. Number 8, examples of antagonistic hormones. We should have 2 sets of examples here that I told you over and over.
Insulin, glucagon,
Insulin, glucagon,
and parathyroid, thyroid, and calcitonin.
parathyroid, and calcitonin. Those are the 2 you need to keep in mind. One of them will be on this test, and one of them will be on a later test. What happens when a muscle contracts?
Short.
It shortens. That's the short answer of it anyway.
Yeah.
Isotonic and isometric. Which one can turn into the other?
Isometric.
Can turn into?
Isotonic.
That is true. Isometric can turn into isotonic. Do thick and thin filaments in skeletal muscle overlap when at rest?
Yes.
They better. Requirements of secondary active transport. All active transport must have energy, ATP, that's right. Hey, y'all starting to wake up a little bit. It's exciting when you know answers, isn't it? It's a confidence builder. What process does dialysis use? It's a simple process. It's simple diffusion. I tried to use that as a hint, saying simple. Curly got it. Hypotonic, hypertonic, and isotonic. Which one does the cell swell in? Hypotonic. And obviously hypertonic, the cell would.
Shrink.
Very good. What's our general rule for these solutions that'll help us remember? Everywhere salt goes,
Water bubbles.
very good. The more you drink, the more you pee, very good. There are things in life you'll use forever from this class, unlike algebra.
Oh, Lord.
You actually use it a lot, you just don't call it algebra or you'd go blank. Saturation transport maximum. This is probably a section of a chapter that I skipped over. But to an extent, it's pretty important, so I have a test question. And like example, I think the exact example they use in the book is like let's say a bus pulls up to a bus stop and it has seats in it that'll hold 50 people. When 50 people get on, it's full, it's saturated, it cannot take any more. So in the body, a red blood cell can hold only so many oxygen molecules. And red blood cells also like carbon monoxide. If it's available, it'll hop on first. It actually has priority. So when all the seats are taken, whether it be by oxygen or carbon monoxide or whatever, then it's saturated. It cannot take any more. So saturation transport maximum is the maximum it'll transport.
Is that only dealing with red blood cells?
Oh, it can be the amount of glucose in the bloodstream. It can only take so much before it overspills and we release. There's lots of spots in there it can be used for. But it's, you pick up you put a towel over a wet spot. If towel can absorb it all, then it gets it. If it absorbs up to a point, it can't absorb anymore, it's saturated in it. You hold it up and it's dripping out. That's the same thing. It can only hold so much. Number 16, primary intracellular and extracellular ions. What's the most abundant intracellular ion? It's out of chapter 6. What is it? Potassium. Potassium. The most abundant extracellular outside. Sodium. Potassium equilibrium potential is closest to resting membrane potential, which is a negative 90 millivolts. Throw that one in there. Normal resting is negative 70, but potassium by itself can hold a negative 90, so it's pretty darn close. 18 is a lot of terms: chemoreceptors, mechanoreceptors, thermoreceptors, photoreceptors. Just no examples of those. 19 sensory receptor fields. We talked about where you might be more sensitive. We decided your extremities are way more sensitive. The thumb is more sensitive than your leg, right? Or your back. Limbic system, it's brought into play here because of, it mentioned it back when we was talking about taste and smell. And the limbic system being instinctive, we're born with it. We have very little nervous control, which we're going to start talking about at chapter 7, 8, and 9. The thing it's closely related to in these chapters would be smell, olfaction. Limbic system's more linked to that. 21, purpose of vestibulocochlear nerve. Obviously to send information to the brain about equilibrium, hearing, and even balance, such as, well, that goes with equilibrium, but rotational acceleration specifically. (22) Knowing the pathway of sound. Y'all did part of this in lab, didn't you? Didn't they? This is kind of a brief version of this. External auditory meatus, which is your external canal. Directs sound to the tympanic membrane, which directs sound to the ossicles, which sends it to the oval window. That's going to be the brief version of that. We know then that sound waves turn into vibrations and endolymph that bends hair cells. It goes to the vestibulocochlear nerve, and we interpret sound. The higher the pitch, the more they're bent. 23, conduction deafness, nerve deafness. Which one can we help with hearing aids? Conduction deafness, which is a standard age-related deafness over time. Nerve deafness tends to be more permanent and less helped. We can help it the least. Could buildup of earwax cause a conduction deafness problem?
Yes.
Absolutely. Just think, if your eardrum is surrounded by earwax, it's not going to be able to direct sound very well, is it? If you clogged up right in here with earwax, it's not going to get down through there, is it?
Have you ever tried to get earwax out of your ear?
No.
Like besides a Q-tip?
Q-tips are illegal. I think there's a law against that, according to doctors anyway. Because all it does is shove the big pieces on down in there, and you clean up the little edges. And it shoves them right in around the eardrum, and you wonder why you can't hear.
There's supposed to be some candle wax trick with
Yeah.
your ear, and then you pull it out.
You melt it, and it runs out. Threshold of sound. What is it? What's the minimum decibels we can hear? 0, that's right. Understand how you might correct astigmatism, myopia, hyperopia. We talked about those on the board, and we said what kind of lens would correct those. Purpose of rods and cones. Rods see at night, cones see at day. Which one provides the most visual acuity? The best vision. cones, daylight cones, yes. 27, antidiuretic hormone. What organ you think it's gonna target? What organ would play a huge role conserving water for us? Kidneys. On 28, understand these terms. The synergistic, we had complementary, where several of them worked together to create milk, I think. And we had synergistic permissive, which I think estrogen enabled the uterus to become more sensitive to progesterone. And antagonistic, we already talked about those. So 2 hormones that are antagonistic, opposing. Cushing syndrome. What would be a cause of Cushing syndrome?
High levels of cortisol?
That would be high levels of corticosteroid, yep, cortisol. What, other than a defect of the adrenal cortex, of course a tumor in the adrenal cortex could cause that, couldn't it? Could cause oversecretion or damage. What could cause it? What everyday activity could cause an oversecretion of cortisol? That's it. That's something we tend to take for granted, that we just deal with it day in and day out, but prolonged stress could cause this problem. What, the thyroid gland, what does it produce? T3, it actually produces T4, which converts to T3, and what's the last one? The antagonist to parathyroid. Calcitonin. So thyroxine and calcitonin is what it's producing. Thyroid gland disorders. What's the one in the book where they showed a picture of a woman with bulging eyes? Do you remember what that was called? Yeah, they had a name for it. It is hyperthyroid, but exothalamus. Isn't that the one with bulging eyes? Exothalamus. And of course, you need to understand the differences in hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism. So it's not just know some disorders, but understand the difference in those. Diabetes, type 1, insulin dependent. Type 2 doesn't have to be insulin dependent. (33) is tetany and trippy. Tetany is sustained contraction. Trippy is warm-up effect, gradual increase. You don't start by seeing if you can throw a football 100 yards on the first throw. Start some little tosses, warming up. Now the process of skeletal muscle contraction, relaxation. That sheet should actually be in your notes that I put up on the board. You should actually have that in that original set of notes. (35) resting membrane potential. What is the average? -70. -70 millivolts. 36, accommodation is focusing. 37, rhodopsin is our light sensitive pigment that works with rods or cones? Rods, yes. 38, components of vestibular apparatus. That's utricle, saccule, and semicircular canals. 39, melanin is skin pigment. Scratch, melanocyte stimulating hormone, scratch it. I think it's produced by the thyroid, but they don't even talk about it hardly in the book. And then of course melatonin comes from what gland?
Pituitary.
Remember that little gland we talked about so much? That's a good answer, but it's not right on this one. But when in doubt, always answer with hypothalamus. It's a good answer. The pineal gland, remember the one that lack of light produces more melatonin, more light produces less, directly associated with depression. And number 40, growth hormone obviously affects growth. In an adult, excessive growth hormone causes what disease? Nope, that's in a child. Too much growth hormone produces gigantism. In an adult, it's acromegaly.
I don't know how to spell that.
Just put acro and megaly. A-C-R-O-M-E-G-A-L-Y. Megaly. Oh, there is one on the back. What will endurance training do to a muscle?
Build it up.
It'll increase the size of the muscle, but what's it increasing?
ATP.
You're really close. I'm proud of you. It's going to increase the number of mitochondria to produce more energy. And your whole body's like this. The more you require of your body, the more it'll prepare for that requirement. You know, people that don't have a lot of energy, it's just hard to get up and exercise knowing we need to. But if you can ever make yourself do it long enough, the body will start producing more energy, expecting you to exercise. It's easy for me to sit up here and say that. It's not so easy to go home and do it. 42, rigor mortis. What's really causing it? We get the calcium moved in, but we don't get the calcium moved out, so it's lack of what? What do we need to move it in and out? ATP. Yeah, that's your ultimate demise. The cells are now dead, not producing anymore. We used up our stored amount and we got it stiff, but we wasn't able to relax it. In 43, hopefully you can still match up A's and T's and C's and G's. We just a little check system here. So what's it worth to you to put the test off to Friday? Is it worth an entire chapter 7 for lecture on Wednesday?
Yes.
Really? Okay. That's what we'll do.
Because I'll spend tomorrow sleeping after class.
I think you can turn that off, Tracy. I think we're done.